A powerful voice in the church was suddenly silenced. Bishop Charles H. Ellis III, once loved and respected across the nation, found himself at the center of a controversy no one saw coming. He had built a name, a brand, a ministry that stretched beyond Detroit and into millions of homes through television, conferences, and social media. But behind the smooth preaching and flashing lights, something was starting to fall apart, and fast. You won't believe how quickly everything changed. Bishop Ellis wasn't just a church leader, he was a spiritual celebrity. The son of Bishop David L. Ellis Sr., Charles inherited Greater Grace Temple, one of the largest and most influential Pentecostal churches in America. People believed he was chosen for greatness, and at first he lived up to it. The church grew in numbers, influence, and reach. He spoke to packed congregations, hosted high-profile events, and even led the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world. People said he had a gift, a presence. Let me tell you, it looked like he could do no wrong. But here is the shocking part. While his sermons were powerful and his presence strong, there were quiet whispers from behind the pulpit. People close to the ministry started noticing changes. Bishop Ellis no longer seemed like the humble servant his father had been. His wardrobe became more flashy. His sermons became more performance than prayer. Some said the church was becoming more like a business, with him as the CEO. The private jets, the fancy cars, the big productions. Some called it favor, others called it pride. Still, no one dared speak publicly. After all, who would question a man of God? This is where it gets interesting. Members started leaving. Some longtime leaders resigned. The offering requests became more aggressive. The energy in the church shifted. And then came the moment that exposed everything to the world, the Ariana Grande incident. At Aretha Franklin's funeral, a global event, Bishop Ellis was seen on live television holding Ariana a little too closely. The cameras caught his hand in a place it shouldn't have been. At first, people gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was an accident, but when the footage went viral and Ariana's uncomfortable reaction was replayed over and over again, people started asking serious questions. His response didn't help. He made a joke about her name, comparing it to a Taco Bell item. That joke, tone-deaf and careless, only made things worse. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended. Women's groups, pastors, and even celebrities called him out. But what made it even more disturbing was that this wasn't the first time people had felt uncomfortable around him. It was just the first time the whole world saw it. After the Ariana Grande incident, it felt like the mask had finally slipped. What was once whispered in private now became public outrage. But the real twist? That moment on stage wasn't the beginning. It was just the spark that lit a fire already burning quietly within the church walls. Former church members, especially women, began speaking out. One by one, their voices rose from silence. And this is where destiny took an unexpected turn. A woman identified only as KS posted a long message on Facebook. Her words were raw, heartbreaking, and deeply disturbing. She shared how counseling sessions with Bishop Ellis started as spiritual but slowly turned into something else, something that didn't feel right. Compliments about her appearance, questions about her body, comments disguised as jokes. She said at first she thought she was imagining things, but then she saw the same pattern happening with other women. Let me tell you, this was no coincidence. More stories poured in. Former volunteers, choir members, and young adult leaders began to share similar experiences. They described being invited to late-night meetings under the excuse of mentorship, only to find themselves in uncomfortable conversations. Some mentioned long, unwanted hugs. Others talked about being told they needed to be more obedient, more open, more spiritually mature if they questioned anything. One woman recalled being asked whether she was a virgin during a private session meant to be about prayer. What makes this story different is how deep the silence ran. Many of the women said they tried to speak up. They told other leaders. They asked for help. But instead of support, they were shamed. They were told they were disrespecting a man of God. Some were told to pray harder. Others were accused of lying or being used by the devil to tear down the ministry. Imagine the emotional toll of that, being hurt and then blamed for it. The power imbalance was so strong, many said they felt paralyzed. You don't say no to a bishop, not without consequences. And the craziest part, even with all these testimonies, many people in the church still refused to believe it. Bishop Ellis continued preaching. He continued leading. He still had loyal supporters who defended him no matter what. Some said the women were jealous. Others called them bitter. But slowly, outside voices began to challenge this blind loyalty. A local podcast called Sanctified but Silenced aired interviews with several former members. These weren't just vague accusations, these were detailed, emotional, and hard to ignore. Dates, names, events. They talked about how spiritual authority was being used to manipulate, control, and isolate people. One guest said it perfectly. This isn't about attacking the church. This is about saving it. Then another shocking detail surfaced. A leaked memo from a former staff member suggested that the church already knew about at least 2 complaints against Bishop Ellis before the Ariana incident. But no investigation was ever launched. No action was taken. Instead, the women were asked to forgive and forget. And just like that, the cycle continued. This is how the system protected itself, not the victims. By now, the story had moved far beyond Detroit. The controversy around Bishop Ellis was no longer just about a single moment caught on camera. It had become a conversation about power, silence, and what happens when spiritual leadership goes unchecked for too long. But here's the shocking part. While former members were finally finding the courage to speak, inside the church, the show continued like nothing had ever happened. Greater Grace Temple kept broadcasting sermons. Ellis kept preaching, smiling, and carrying on as if nothing had changed. The stage remained grand, the crowds still showed up, and the music still played. But those who had been watching closely noticed something different, an unease in the air. The atmosphere had shifted. People weren't shouting, "Amen," with the same joy. Some looked distracted. Others just stayed quiet. Something sacred had cracked. And this is where it gets interesting. Church leaders who had once supported Ellis began to quietly step back. A few unfollowed him online. Others declined speaking engagements where he was present. But no one said anything publicly. It was as if they were all waiting for what no one knew. Meanwhile, the victims kept talking. More women came forward. Some gave interviews anonymously. Others stood tall and used their real names. And their stories painted a pattern, one that was hard to deny. They described the same playbook: charm, closeness, boundaries being crossed, then confusion, guilt, and silence. Many said the spiritual guidance they sought turned into emotional manipulation. They trusted him, they looked up to him, and that trust was used against them. The pain wasn't just personal, it was spiritual. One woman said, "He didn't just make me question myself, he made me question God." But the craziest part? No accountability followed, no apology that mattered, no investigation, nothing changed, and people began to wonder, how much protection does one man really have? Was it fear? Was it loyalty? Or was it the simple fact that some churches care more about image than integrity? Let me tell you, when power is protected at all costs, truth becomes dangerous, and the people who try to tell it often pay the highest price. A few whistleblowers said they lost friendships. Some were kicked out of ministries they had served in for years. Others were warned to stay quiet or face consequences. One even said they received anonymous threats. Still, they kept speaking. Meanwhile, the court of public opinion wasn't staying quiet. More blogs, podcasts, and gospel news outlets started picking up the story. Public opinion started shifting. Not everyone was siding with Ellis anymore. Some called for his resignation. Others demanded a full investigation. A growing number of voices from within the gospel world Other pastors, worship leaders, and activists began calling this what it really was, a reckoning. And here's what makes this story different. It's not just about Bishop Ellis. It's about what's been allowed to happen in too many churches for too long. Charisma over character, influence over integrity, showmanship over shepherding. And now, the very system that once protected Ellis was beginning to crack under the pressure. As the pressure mounted, it became clear that the world was no longer willing to look away. Bishop Ellis was now a symbol. Some saw him as a victim of cancel culture, others as the face of a broken system. And yet, in the middle of it all, one question remained unanswered. How had it gone on for so long without anyone stopping it? This is how the story took an even darker turn. People started digging deeper. Church insiders whispered about internal memos, meetings behind closed doors, and private conversations that pointed to one chilling truth. Some leaders may have known more than they ever admitted. One former board member said complaints were handled quietly to avoid scandal. Another claimed financial records were kept intentionally vague to protect the bishop's image. And still, he stood on that pulpit, unbothered, unmoved. But here's the craziest part. While the church stayed silent, a community outside the walls began to rise. Survivors, advocates, journalists, they didn't stop talking. They wrote blogs, organized prayer calls for healing, and demanded change. A few even started their own ministries, safe spaces for people who had been hurt by spiritual abuse. The impact went far beyond Greater Grace Temple. Other churches began reevaluating their leadership structures. Conversations started about power, gender, and accountability in the Black church community. The domino effect had begun, and let me tell you, it shook the foundation. It forced a conversation that had been buried for years, because this wasn't just about one bishop. It was about every leader who used their position to control rather than serve. It was about every person who looked the other way when something felt wrong. It was about the silence that covered sin in the name of protecting the church. Still, Bishop Ellis never stepped down. He never faced formal church discipline. No official report was released, no public investigation was confirmed, and that silence spoke volumes. It told victims that their pain didn't matter. It told the world that power still came before people. And it told every young believer watching that spiritual influence could be used as a shield. But here's where destiny took its final turn. People woke up, not just in Detroit, but everywhere. They started asking hard questions. They stopped being impressed by big stages and shiny suits. They stopped trusting blindly. Because the truth is, the downfall of Bishop Ellis wasn't just about failure, it was about a lesson. A painful, uncomfortable, but necessary lesson. So what happens now? Will Bishop Ellis ever be held accountable? Will the church finally admit its role in protecting him? Will other leaders learn from this moment or fall into the same trap? No one knows for sure. But what we do know is this. The days of hiding behind titles and pulpits are ending, because whether you're a bishop, pastor, prophet, or preacher, if your character doesn't match your calling, the truth will find its way to the light. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, always. And that's the final warning this story leaves behind. Your title can't save you, your followers won't cover you, and your stage will never be bigger than your truth.